In this tutorial, we're going to start with some vector data that was created in another design package. We're going to open that within the software and show you how to size and position your job around it. Next, we're going to take those vectors, we're going to group them together so that it makes it easier to select them as we go through and calculate toolpaths. And then we're going to go ahead and generate efficient toolpaths in order to machine this using a variety of tool shapes and sizes. Some of the particular features we're going to look at is the software's ability to calculate a toolpath using two tools. This is where we start with a larger tool in order to machine as much material away as we can within a pocket, and then come back with a smaller tool to clean up around the edges and get all the detail. We're also going to look at calculating a Prism toolpath in order to give us the beveled effect you can see on the lettering here. And as we work our way along, we're going to show you how you can assign colours to a toolpath so that you can achieve this nice rendered effect in order to create an image that you could send to a customer for approval, or that you could use yourself to see how different colours might work on a job. Finally, we're going to show you how you can save toolpaths and append them together in order to take advantage of the fact that you may have multiple toolpaths that use the same tool, and be able to save those as a single file to send to your CNC machine. So let's go ahead and start a new copy of the software. If we have a vector file that's been designed in another drawing package and we want to open that data inside of the software, there are two ways for us to get it in. One is to create a new file or have an existing part where we import that file, go to File, Import, and import the vector data. The other way is if we know all of our data is inside the part and we just want to open it within the software, to use the regular open function. So if I come down here and click on the icon to open an existing file, from the project folder I'm going to select the file howling-wolf.eps. So it's an EPS vector file. When we hit open, what the software is going to do by default is set up a job which is exactly the size of the vectors we've imported and in the position that the vectors were created in their original drawing package. So that's represented by putting the software automatically creating this offset value here to show us the position of the corner of the vectors. What we can do now is make some adjustments to this to give us some space around the part and to get it in the position we want it to be in. So I'm going to edit the job size to be 36 inches. I'm going to edit the height of our material to be 24 inches, so that should be enough space to fit our vectors within and fit the tool to cut them out. I'm going to cut this out of 1.5 inch thickness, and we imagine we're using something like a high density urethane product, a sign foam, that kind of thing, in order to machine this part. I'm going to keep the date and position in the lower left, but I'm going to switch off the offset. That means that the lower left of my job setup is now going to become X0, Y0, and we can see that represented by the red square here, and on the ruler it says 0, and on the ruler up the top here it's got 0. So that's now the 0, 0 position that I'm going to set up on the CNC when I position my material and set up my tool. I'm happy with that, so I'm going to hit OK. Now notice, because of the way we've opened this, the data is located in the against the left edge and the bottom edge, so I now want to just center this in the middle of the part. I'm going to select all the vectors. I can do that by going to Edit and select all vectors, or you can see there the shortcut is Control A. So if I go ahead and hold the Control key down and press the A key on the keyboard, that will just select all the vectors that I've got within my part. Now we can come over and either click on the icon to align selected objects and go into the form for that, or use the shortcut key, which is F9 on the keyboard. That's the function key F9. When I hit that, we can see that's just centered my selected vectors in the middle of my job setup area. Just going to click in the white space to deselect those vectors. Now, to help us keep the part organized and select the data that we want to use to calculate different toolpaths, we could use the layers. We could assign these vectors to different layers. In this case, the part is actually quite straightforward, and really all I want is the ability to select all the vectors that represent the inside of the wolf easily and all the vectors that represent the text easily. So rather than layers in this case, which we have covered in a number of the other tutorials, I'm just going to group together those vectors, and that should make it easy enough for me to select the items that I want when I come to calculate the toolpaths. First thing I'm going to do is drag a box. I'm going to start around this area on the screen here, click and drag down to the right, and the only vectors I want to have within the box, completely within the box, are the ones that represent the inside of the wolf's face. So if we drag that to around this point here and let go, that should only select those vectors. To group those, I can come over to this icon here and click it, and they will now act as a single object if I go ahead and click to select or did any other operation on them. I'm going to do a similar operation for the text, which just click to deselect that, click a box starting around here, holding the mouse key. I'm going to drag this down and I'm going to let go round about there, making sure that only the text is completely enclosed within there. The shortcut key to group something, if we don't want to go across to the icon, is just G on the keyboard. So now, having selected that, I can just hit G, and again that will just group those together. So if I just click on one of them, now everything becomes selected. So it should be very easy for us now to just select either the outer vector, one of these inner borders here, the vectors for the wolf, and the vectors for the text. Now the part's ready for us to start calculating toolpaths. So we need to go over to the Toolpath tab, which we can do with this icon here, or we can hit the F12 key on the keyboard, which will close the drawing tab and open the Toolpaths tab for us. Now, as with any toolpath calculation, the first job that we want to do is make sure that our material is set up correctly. So we come up to the top here, click on the button that says Set underneath Material Setup. Within here we want to double check that our Z0 is set in the right place. In this case we're going off the top of the block. Thickness of our material is 1.5 inches. I'm going with the lower left hand corner for my X0, Y0 position. Just need to double check the rapid gaps are reasonable. Set my home position, we'll just put in a value of 1/2 inch for the Z there and go ahead and hit OK. At this point we're ready to start calculating our toolpaths. As with all the examples we show you, you should make sure that if you do plan to cut this, that you use values that are appropriate for your particular setup, material, machine and tooling, and that are going to ensure a safe result. For our first toolpath, I'd like to just pocket this vector here. So we're going to machine out the area between this border, the wolf's head and the tree. So we just click on this vector to select it. I'm going to come over to the pocket toolpath icon. I'm going to click on that. I'm going to start at 0. I want the cut depth for this toolpath to be 1/2 inch. We're going to machine 1/2 inch into this area here. I'm going to choose a 1/4 inch end mill, so we can hit select, pick that tool from the tool database and hit OK. I'm going to hit edit and we'll go ahead and edit the pass depth for this tool to be 0.25 inches. We're cutting fairly soft material here, so that should definitely be no problem. Here I'm going to choose the offset to clear this pocket out. It doesn't really matter for this particular material, and we're going to go ahead and just call this pocket top area and hit calculate on this. So there we can see we've calculated our toolpath. We could go ahead and preview that if we wanted. Before we do preview this toolpath, I'd like to look at an option we've got to estimate how long the toolpath might take to cut, and then show you how we might make that more efficient using some of the options we've got with the pocketing toolpath. So let's just close the preview form, and we're going to come into this tool, this icon here, which will give us a summary of the toolpath, including an estimated time for how long the software thinks it'll take to machine. So if we click on that, if we had multiple toolpaths, they'd all be listed up here. At the moment we just have a single toolpath, and the estimate based on the length of this toolpath and the feeds and speeds that we've specified for it is 32 minutes, almost 33 minutes. In reality, when we actually come to machine this, it might take longer than that, or it may take less time than that, and that would completely depend upon your machine, your control software, how your machine accelerates and decelerates, and even to some extent the type of toolpath that it is. Many of our customers are able to get values from the toolpath summary that are reasonably accurate. However, what they normally need to do is run toolpaths on their machine, make a note of how long they actually take to cut, and then adjust this scale factor that you've got down the bottom here in order to create a multiplier that'll make these times more accurate. For instance, if we were to machine this toolpath and we found that it actually took around 45 minutes to cut, then what we'd need to do is come in and change our scale factor for our particular machine to be something like 3 or maybe 2.9, something like that, and then that's going to update the estimate and that'll be used for future toolpaths. In this case, I'm just going to leave the value at 2, and we're going to take this as being a roughly 32-minute toolpath, although as I say, that could vary a great deal depending on your particular setup. So in this case, we might be able to do this quicker by doing this using a larger tool to hog out the majority of the area of this, and then the small tool just to make sure we're still getting the same level of detail around the profile. So let's go ahead and just hit close, and we'll double click on the toolpath here to go back into the Pocket toolpath form to make an edit to it. So just double click the name there, the toolpath form will open up again. To activate this ability to pocket an area with two different tools, a larger and smaller tool, as efficiently as possible, we're going to use this option here to use larger area clearance tool. If you don't see this option available in your Pocket toolpath form, it's because you don't have the Show Advanced Toolpath Options checked at the top of the form here. You need to make sure this is checked for this particular choice to be available to you. It's worth noting that you really don't want to toggle the advanced toolpath options on and off, because every time you do that you have the potential to lose the information in the form and you'd have to re-enter it all. So generally speaking, depending on the type of work you do, you're probably going to just choose whether you want to leave the advanced toolpath options switched on or leave the advanced toolpaths options unavailable. In this case, make sure it's checked. I'm going to come down and click on the box to use larger area clearance tool. Going to hit select, and from the tool database we're going to select the 1/2 inch end mill, 0.5 inch end mill, and click on the button to OK that. For this toolpath only, I want to override the pass depth for this tool. We're cutting fairly soft foam material, so I'm going to hit edit, and I'm going to tell the software that I can go at least 1/2 inch deep per pass with this, so that should cut my 1/2 inch pocket depth in a single pass. Let's go ahead and hit OK. And now I'm just going to leave all the rest of the settings the same as they were for our original calculation. Come down, click calculate, and what the software has done is replace our single toolpath with two toolpaths. These essentially have the same name, except one of them has the word clear added in square parentheses here. That toolpath is going to be the one that uses the larger tool to clear the majority of the material. If we hover the cursor over the name of that toolpath, we can see in the tooltip that pops up, that's the box there with the text in it, that it tells me the size of the tool and the parameters for that particular toolpath, and I can see there that that is the 1/2 inch end mill. If I come over the second one in the list, I can see that is the 1/4 inch end mill. Now if we just switch off the smaller tool, you can see there that's the area that's being hogged out with the larger tool, and if we switch that one off and switch on the smaller tool, we can see that our 1/4 inch end mill is just going to go around the profile, and where it can fit, like areas like the wolf's mouth or this small area between the tree and the wolf's neck, it's going to clean up that material. So in effect what we're going to get at the end of that second toolpath is the same result we would have had if we ran the whole pocket with that smaller tool, except now it should have been cut much quicker. If we just hit close on the preview form for a second, come out and check the summary, we can see that the total time for those two toolpaths is just under 13 minutes, whereas if you'll remember from the previous calculation where we were cutting that whole pocket with the smaller tool, the estimate was around 33 minutes. So we've shaved off about 20 minutes just for that toolpath. Of course you do have to factor in that you will need to make a tool change now. So again, it's all just finding a balance between what's going to be most efficient for a particular job or the way that your tooling and machine operates. So let's just close the toolpath summaries now. I do want to go ahead and preview those two toolpaths, so we can come back to the preview function by clicking on this icon here. I'm going to select the first of these two, which is my larger tool. And then what I'd like to do for my previews for this particular job is try and set them up with colours which will be similar to what I would plan to paint the finished sign in. That may allow us to create a three-dimensional image at the end of our toolpathing that we could send to a customer as some kind of a proof. So I'm going to come down and choose the option for toolpath colour here, and from the drop down list the default is no fill. So if I choose toolpath color but don't choose a color, then I will still effectively get just the material color. If we choose toolpath color, click on the drop down and then choose a color from within here, then that will be the color that it uses to preview that toolpath. So if I click on the white in this case, and then I'm going to click on the button to preview selected toolpath, and then we can see the area that the 1/2 inch tool is going to machine. Now if we click on the 1/4 inch toolpath, again with toolpath color checked, I'm going to select to start with here just a dark color so that we can see the difference between these two, and then we'll also change that to white as well for the purposes of our visualization. So if we preview that with the darker color, you can see there clearly the areas that that tool is going to machine out that the larger tool wouldn't have been able to get. And if we want to now, we can just change that color to white so that we've got our pocket area there that we've made entirely filled with a white color, as I say, and that's essentially to replicate the idea that we are going to paint that area of the sign white when it's finished. So let's close the preview form now. Before we move on to the next set of toolpaths, also worth noting that when you've got two toolpaths like this that are essentially linked because they were created with a single operation, if you double click on either one, or you select either one and come up to the Edit Toolpath icon, then it's going to open the form with the information in it, and if you change parameters in here it would recalculate both those toolpaths. You can see that it's still got the information for the 1/4 inch and the 1/2 inch tool, which is why we've got two toolpaths generated from that operation. Next thing I'd like to do is to calculate the toolpath for the wolf's face detail. So let's come over and click on the 2D View tab where it says the file name here. I'm going to select the group of vectors for the wolf's face. Remember we selected those and grouped them together earlier. And I want to V-carve these because there's a lot of fine detail, so using the V-carve toolpath will allow me to get all these nice sharp corners in here. I'm going to come over, click on the V-carve icon. Start depth is going to be 0, the top of the material, and from the tool section I'm going to select, and from the V-bits I'm going to choose a 90-degree V-bit tool. Just double check all the parameters and hit OK. Now I'm just going to take the default settings for this, other than we'll change the name of this to V-carve wolf, hit calculate, and what we're going to see when we preview this is it's going to do a very deep cut. The depth of the cut for a V-carving is determined by the width of the vectors it's cutting and the angle of the tool. So if I hit preview, we'll see there that in the areas where the width of the vector is not very large, like around the ears here, then that all looks very nice. But in the middle of the face here, where we have got quite a wide area, that is going very, very deep, and that's really not the effect I'm looking for at all there. So what I'm going to do is just undo that last preview that we did there. I'm going to hit undo last to go back. I'm going to close that, and then I'm going to double click on our V-carve wolf toolpath, and I'm going to use an option that we have within here to limit how deep this toolpath goes. If we don't check this, then as you saw there, it just goes as deep as the angle of the tool can get within the area you've selected. Here, if I check this option to limit this to a flat depth, I'm going to put in a value of 0.2. And I could just have this all cut with the V-bit tool, but when it gets to that flat area, that's going to take a really long time to cut because the tool has such a small tip that we have a very small step over. So in a way that's similar to what we did with our pocket toolpath, I'm going to add a second tool here. I'm going to say use flat area clearance tool, and from here I'm going to select a 1/4 inch end mill. So what the software is going to do is cut as much of the detail in the face, the flat area, with that end mill, and then it's just going to do all the smaller pieces around the edge and all the areas where that end mill can't fit with the V-bit tool in order to clean them up. So here I'm going to go ahead and hit calculate. Similar to what we saw before, we've now got two toolpaths. Remember, we've got the 1/4 inch here, and then we've got the V-carving toolpath. If we just zoom in the 3D view, we can look at those. May want to just switch off the V-carving. So that's all the areas that 1/4 inch end mill can get. And then if we switch that off and switch on the V-carving, and there's the rest of it that'll need to be finished off by the V-bit. Again, it's probably easier to see that if we use the preview function. Let's choose the end mill toolpath first, the one with the larger tool. I'm going to choose a toolpath color for this of brown, so that we're going to shade in the area that we cut there with brown. Then I'm going to say preview selected toolpath. So there we can see what's being cut with that 1/4 inch end mill. And then I'm going to select the V-carving toolpath. In here I'm going to select the same toolpath color, the brown color there, and click on the button to preview selected toolpath. Now we can see what's being done between those two toolpaths. So in effect what we've created is this nice kind of internal beveled edge by running that end mill first and then cleaning everything up with the V-bit. So let's go back to the 2D view now and click on the tab. Or if we wanted to, we could tile the windows to simultaneously see the 2D and the 3D view. We can go up to View, tile the windows horizontal or vertical, or we've got the page down and page up keys on the keyboard as shortcut keys to do that. Let's click to tile the windows vertical so we can see 2D view here, the 3D view here. Just going to go into the standard ISO view there. Next, what I want to do is pocket between this vector here and the text. So I'm going to select that inner vector first, shift and select the text. If you remember, we put all the text into a single group there, so I just need to click on that once. I'm going to hit close. And what I want to do here is a similar pocketing operation than we did at the top part of the sign here. This time we're going to go a little bit deeper though, and we're also going to need to use a smaller cleanup tool to get all the detail around the lettering. So let's come over and click on the Pocket Toolpath options. Cut depth for this is going to be 0.75, 3/4 of an inch. Tool, I'm going to use, the smaller tool I want to use is a 1/8 inch end mill. We don't have one of these currently set up in our tool database, so I'm going to select my 0.25 inch end mill here. I'm going to say copy. I'm going to click on that first tool there. I'm going to enter the name 0.125, and very importantly I need to immediately change the diameter there. It's most important to double check whenever you add or copy a new tool in here that the size in the name matches the size that you put for the diameter, because otherwise that could cause a very confusing situation where you think you're selecting a tool with one name but the actual diameter you've entered is different. Pass depth for this, 1/8 of an inch is fine, and we'll just take all the other values and go ahead and hit OK. So that's a 1/8 tool for our finishing tool, if you like. That's going to give us ultimately the smallest detail that we've got in here. And we'll still go ahead and use the 1/2 inch tool in order to hog out the rest of the material there. Software's still happy to go between the 1/2 inch to the 1/8 inch, just as it was to go between the 1/4 and the 1/2 inch. So now we're going to change this, and we'll call this Pocket Lower Area and hit calculate. So there we've got our toolpath. I'm just going to maximize the 3D view for a second. If we want to, again, we could just switch off and see what the 1/2 inch tool is doing, switch that off and see what the 1/8 inch tool is doing, profiling all around there and getting in between all these letters to give us all the detail we want. So let's preview this now. I'm going to select the larger tool first to preview, change the toolpath color here, and we'll go in and give this a dark blue color. Click on the button to preview selected toolpaths. So there we can see everything that's going to be machined out by the 1/2 inch tool. Now we can come and select the pocket that's going to come in with the smaller tool in order to clean that up and give us the detail. Again, I'm going to change that color, and just so we can see the contrast for a moment, I'm first going to go in and we'll just pick an orange color so it's very obvious what this is going to cut. So if we say preview selected toolpath, there you can see what that smaller tool is going to be able to machine that the larger tool couldn't. So we're really getting a lot of value by doing that in two tools, because we're getting the detail of cutting the pocket with an 1/8 inch tool but getting the speed of the majority of it being cut with the 1/2 inch. I'm going to change that toolpath color so it matches, and come in and click on the dark blue there, so that area is all shaded with that nice dark blue color, again to emulate the colors that we're hoping to use when we paint this. Now we can close the Preview Toolpaths form. Next thing I want to do is create a toolpath that's going to give me a kind of a beveled effect on top of my lettering and these decorative elements here. We refer to this as a Prism toolpath. So I need to go over back to the 2D view and select the appropriate vectors. I'm going to hit the page up key on my keyboard, which is the shortcut key to tile the windows vertically. I'm going to click off the vectors to deselect what we currently have chosen, and then I'm going to click just on the text group, and that will become our current selected object. Next we're going to come over and we're going to choose the toolpath icon here, Prism Carving Toolpath. From within here, the software is going to use whatever V-bit I've got selected in order to profile around this in order to give me this beveled edge on the top. Now, depending on the angle of the bit and the width of the widest part of my letters is going to determine how deep this needs to go to ensure that we don't truncate that pyramid and that it comes to a point. And what I can do once I've selected the tool I'm going to use, and in this case we're going to use the 90-degree V-bit. If you don't have that selected, then go ahead and hit select, choose that from the tool database, hit OK, and then I can click on this button here that says Set Depth for Full Prism. When we click on that, it gives me, it calculates automatically how deep this toolpath is going to need to get in order to make sure that I get a point in the middle of all my lettering. So all it's doing is looking at the angle of the bit and the width of the vectors to calculate that. So I know whatever depth I put in here has to be at least this value or deeper for me to make sure I don't truncate the top of those the prism. So I'm going to give myself a little bit extra here. I'm going to take this down to 0.72. Remember, the area we machined out here was 3/4 of an inch, 0.75. So we should have easily enough space for this to machine and leave a very small return around the outside of our letters. That's typically what that vertical edge is referred to once we've prism carved. Tool selected. I'm going to go ahead and hit Prism Carve. Text will enter for the name and hit the calculate button. If we maximize the 3D view, take a look at the toolpath that we've calculated there. That doesn't look too obvious what that's going to do for us until again we go ahead and preview that and see the 3D effect of running our angled tool around the lines of this toolpath. So with that selected, I'm going to choose a toolpath color, which is a gold color here. Give the effect as if these letters may be gilded, something like that, and click on the button to preview selected toolpath. And there we can see the text that we've created and what effect that Prism toolpath is going to have on our design. Now, one of the big benefits of the preview function within the software is the ability to instantly get feedback on how your toolpaths are going to look. I may take a look at this and decide this is a little bit too strong. The angle is quite steep for the size of the lettering I've got here, and I may decide I'd like to see what this would look like if I used a more shallow angled cutter on it. At this stage, while I'm still in the preview for this, if I think I'm going to make a change, I can click on the button to undo last, so that will go back one step in the previewing here. Then I could double click on that Prism Carve Text toolpath. And then what I could do is come up and select a different tool. Now it may be that I have a 120-degree V-bit that I could use, so we could add this to the tool database here. I can take the one which we've got there, I'm going to make a copy, and then I'm going to change this to 120 degrees, and also remembering to update the name there, very important. Rest of the parameters look okay there, and pass depth may be a little deep, but if I hit apply, the software should warn me if I can't go that deep with that particular size and angle of tool. So it's telling me the maximum pass depth for that tool at that size and angle is 0.361. I'm going to hit OK, and then I'm going to edit that to be 0.35. Now if we hit apply, I don't get the warning message. We've added the 120-degree V-bit. I'm going to hit OK on there. Now I can click Set Depth for Full Prism, and it's going to show me with that tool it's not going to cut nearly as deep, or not going to need to cut nearly as deep as we had set before. So now what I'm going to do is just give that a little bit extra. So I'm going to say my prism depth for this tool will be 0.45 and go ahead and hit calculate. It'll recalculate that toolpath, and now we can say preview selected text, and we can see how that part is going to look based on the new settings that we've put in there. So I prefer the way that looks with the shallower angled tool, so I'm happy that we were able to take a look at that, simulate that in the software here and see what the difference was going to be. So I'm going to stick with that when we come to actually machining our sign, and we're ready for the last operation, which is to create our cutout pass around the outside of the job. I need to go back to the 2D view. I'm going to hit the page down key on the keyboard again so that we can tile the two windows, and now I'm just going to select the outline vector, the outermost vector that we have here, and we're going to do a profile pass around the outside. So let's hit close on the preview toolpaths. Let's come up to profile toolpath. Start depth is going to be 0, cut depth is going to be the full depth of the material we've got in here. So I could either type in the value, or I can hit Z on the keyboard and then the equals sign on the keyboard, so that will just pick up that value for me, 1.5 inches. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch end mill so I get a nice detailed cut around the shape of our sign. I'm just going to hit edit on here and change my pass depth to 0.25 for this toolpath. Remember, we're cutting fairly soft material, so that's fine. I want to make sure I cut on the outside of these vectors, or the vector that I've got selected, and I'm just going to change the name here to profile cutout and hit calculate. Maximize the 3D view so we can see how that looks, and now if we wanted to, we could go ahead and say preview selected toolpath. That's going to cut the part out for us. Okay, so we can see that having gone through there, and if we want to delete the waste material around the edge, we can just double click on it and that will disappear. Now at this point I could save the preview image, and we could save that as a bitmap, a JPEG or something like that, print it or email it to a customer for approval. You may even want to adjust some of the colours that you've got within here to give the customer some choices. So let's just zoom in a little bit on this. Perhaps instead of a sort of natural wood finish on the face of the sign, we may want that to be painted as well. In which case that is not created by a toolpath, that's governed by the material colour at the top here. So I click on the down arrow, I'm going to go up to the top and ask the software to use a solid colour, and from this drop down here I'm going to choose the black colour there. So this may be a colour scheme that we want to offer the customer. We can go ahead and save that preview image, click on the button and give that a name and save it, send that one out, or we may want to offer them different colours within the sign itself, in which case we'd need to go ahead and choose the toolpaths that had machined that area and change those colours within the preview function. So perhaps this background area, we may want to change this so that it's a dark green colour. If I've got a toolpath like this where I've got two different toolpaths, rather than one that are machining this area out, I need to change both of them. You can say dark green there, and so this may be an alternate version of the sign that we would send them an image of and allow them to choose from. This is also a nice way to generate images to put on your website to show people the type of work you can do without actually having to cut the finished pieces too. So once we've generated all the images we need, or if we were just using the preview to make sure that the toolpaths look correct for our own benefit, we can close that form there, and now we may be ready to save these toolpaths and actually send them to the CNC machine. In creating our example, we've generated a number of different toolpaths that use a variety of tool shapes and sizes. When we come to output these for the CNC machine, we want to try and minimize the number of files that we save. We can do that by appending toolpaths together that use the same tool. If you have an automatic tool changer, of course, then you can actually save everything in a single file as long as you've assigned appropriate tool numbers to each tool as you are calculating the toolpaths, in which case that will automatically do the tool changing for you. For anybody that doesn't have an automatic tool changer though, you are going to need to save separate files, one for each tool. However, that does mean we may be able to join some of these toolpaths together. If you don't remember which tool you used for a particular toolpath, you just need to hover over the name of that toolpath and it will give you a summary, as you can see there. So the top one here was calculated with a 1/2 inch end mill. If I come down here, we can see that was also calculated with a 1/2 inch end mill. And they're the tools that correspond to the sort of hogging out operation for the white area and the green area. Now there's no reason why I can't save those as a single file in order to minimize the number of tool changes. There's no safety reason or reason for what's being machined afterwards why I can't just run those toolpaths both first. How I would save them in a single file is to check the boxes to switch them both on. Then I would come up and click on the Save Toolpath icon and make sure that this option at the top to output all visible toolpaths to one file was checked. What that's going to do is look in the list for any toolpath that I've checked, which is what in turn is making it visible in the 3D view. And now I'll just choose the appropriate processor for my machine from the list, hit Save Toolpath, give that a name, and I know that that single file is going to have both of those toolpaths within it, and they'll both be cut on the CNC machine effectively one after another. Let's just hit close on the Save Toolpaths form there. So you do the same operation, carefully working your way through the list to save all the other toolpaths that you've created here. For instance, if I uncheck those two now, the next toolpath I've got here is cut with a 1/4 inch end mill, and if I look down the list I can see that the V-carve pocket is also cut with a 1/4 inch end mill too. So I could take these two toolpaths and I could go ahead and save those, output to a visible file, hit the save button, and I'd have a second file that I was going to use for doing all my 1/4 inch machining. Now the profile cutout is also cut with a 1/4 inch tool, but I would not want to append that to these two because otherwise the part would have been cut out before I'd gone ahead and done any of the V-carving or the detailing in and around the text here. So you do need to be careful not just to append every single toolpath that has the same tool if it's a situation where it doesn't make sense for them to be joined as one file. So I'm not going to run through saving all the toolpaths in this case. We're pretty much at the conclusion of this presentation. I'm going to go ahead and save the file in the project folder to File, Save As, and we'll call that Howling Wolf-TP to show it has the toolpaths in it. You could load that up if you want to take a look at the file. Let's go ahead and hit Save. So let's just take a moment to summarize some of the things we've seen in this example. We started by opening some vectors that had been created in another design package, and because we used the open function to load them in the software, the first thing we needed to do was adjust the size of our job setup and the position of the part within the job. Then we went ahead and started looking at how we could group together vectors that we knew we'd want to select for doing single operations. So we took the vectors that represented the wolf's face, put those into a group. We took all the vectors that represented the text and those decorative elements and put those into a group. And that was done just to make it easier to choose these vectors as we went through and calculated our toolpaths. Next, we worked our way through calculating toolpaths for our design, using some of the tools within the software to help us do it as efficiently as possible. In particular, we looked at how we could get an indication of how long a toolpath would take to cut using the time estimate, how we can use the feature where we can add a second tool to some of the toolpaths so that it will efficiently cut with the large tool as much as it can before doing the finishing work with the small tool. We looked at the ability to create a Prism toolpath to give us this nice beveled effect that we have on the lettering. And also, as we worked along and previewed the toolpaths, we assigned them different colours so that we could get a nice effect of a part which is going to give an indication of the types of finish and colours that it might ultimately be finished with. That may be just beneficial to us as users to see how the part's going to look, or as we saw, we could actually save that image, email it to a customer and give them some indication of how their finished part might actually turn out. Finally, when we looked at saving the toolpaths for the CNC, we discussed the idea of appending toolpaths together that use the same tool as long as it's safe to do that in order to minimize the number of files that we're actually saving and sending to the machine. And that concludes this tutorial.